Welcome to Session 3A, Lightning Talks on Documenting Student Populations. Our two speakers today are Kathy Evans, Reference and Archives Librarian at Shenandoah University, and Ashley Gerald Hill, Processing Archivist at Wake Forest University. They'll both go through their presentations, and then it will be a discussion afterwards. So questions, answers, discussion. We'll be passing around microphones, so you can save all of that until after their presentations. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, everyone, for having me. It's really nice to be here. I'm Kathy Evans, like Rebecca said, and I'm the Reference and Archives Librarian at Shenandoah University. Does anybody know where that is? It's in Winchester, Virginia. So I think that I am the only person representing an out-of-state school today. So thank you, all of you North Carolinians, for having me here today. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is Shenandoah's history, how I got involved in the archives, what we're doing, and our strategies for building a better and more inclusive future. So Shenandoah University was founded in 1875 in Dayton, Virginia. One of our history professors recently, Jonathan Noyalis, recently spoke at a Founders Day celebration in February. He spoke of our school as an institution with a rich history, always finding a way forward. For our first 85 years, we were located in Dayton, Virginia. We've always been a practical institution, not a traditional liberal arts school, but a more preparatory school, preparing students for a productive and purposeful life. On and off, we struggled financially where we were located. We are surrounded by other higher education schools, schools like Madison College, now James Madison University. Does anybody know where that is? Okay, yeah, they were part of the playoffs, I think. So it was called Madison College back in the day, and it's only 5 miles from Dayton, Virginia. In 1950s, the leaders of Shenandoah began to talk with the Chamber of Commerce in Winchester, Virginia, in hopes we could move the school to the city, to their city. Now, that's no small feat. You know, I don't know if you all know in higher ed, a lot of schools close, but I have lots of historical evidence that say that we did it, and we're in Winchester. So against all odds, in 1960, the school moved to Winchester, Virginia. Since then, we have grown. We have a student body of over 4,000 students with 109 degree granting programs. I oversee 3 archives and Allison H. Smith Jr. Library. I oversee the Media Archive, which houses recordings. I might hyperventilate. Somebody, if I pass out, come get me. We house recordings of our performances and recitals from our music conservatory. And then in the United Brethren in Christ, Evangelical United Brethren Archive, known as the EUB Archive, which contains the history of the church that founded the school. And then I oversee also, lastly, the University Archive, which specifically houses the history of the university. So the Media Archive was organized by a full-time library assistant, and the EUB was organized and managed by a staff of volunteers who were interested in the church. A lot of them had parents in the ministry, and they have an interest in the school too. But the University Archive, named the Huffer McAdams Archive, has not received much attention. For many years, there would be a part-time retired faculty member who managed and organized the collection, or at least they attempted to, right? And so then in recent years, we did get a paid part-time archivist who worked 15 hours a week to arrange years of unorganized boxes and some of the, kind of sketchy preservation practices. So as you can imagine, this was not a lucrative position for a part-time archivist. How many of us have worked part-time in the library? Yeah. So she's no longer with us. She's at Jamestown Foundation, which is pretty cool, as a full-time archivist. But the university archive is a mess, okay? It's a valuable one, and it's useful, but it's a mess. And I love the term Lone Ranger. I'm the only archivist on staff. So I've been employed with Shenandoah since 2008. I started as a library assistant, and I earned an MSLS from Penn West Clarion in 2017. I've always had an interest in the history of Shenandoah. I am from the Shenandoah Valley in Shenandoah County along the Shenandoah River, and we got the nearby Shenandoah National Park. I didn't mention that one until earlier. Somebody knew where that was. So it comes natural that I'm interested. My story really begins, though, in the fall of 2020. Unlike many schools across the nation, we opened in person at Shenandoah. With CDC guidelines in place, everybody was distanced and masked, and we had the plexiglass. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. How many of y'all opened in person in the fall of 2020? No, nobody. We did. We rely on that in-person experience. And we have since adopted some hybrid and online, but we really rely on that. So there we were in the fall of 2020, and that fall I encountered an incoming precocious freshman who would later prove to be a vocal advocate for the archive. The student wanted to research the milestones of the university all on her own without any curriculum incentive. Little did we know at that time this would set the stage in preparation for the sesquicentennial that we will celebrate in 2025. As we approach our 150th anniversary in 2025, the archive and myself have been fortunate to receive more attention since that 2020 time. In the spring of 2022, a history student began a series of appointments with me in an effort to research the history of the campus culture from the student body perspective, with a focused interest in the attitudes of integration during the 1960s. And that's him. His name is Aiden, one of our students. And I have his picture by permission, of course. And that is a light box that he constructed himself, and he brought his camera in so he could take some pictures. Because our scanners are downstairs, so it seemed to be more, convenient for him. It was an experiment. So we weren't finding much. At that time, the student body was small, only 100 students or so. Not much was happening on campus in 1960. You have to realize we had just moved, right? We'd moved to Winchester, and it was less than 100 students at that time. So we looked at student handbooks, we looked at school newspapers, and of course the yearbooks, but that represented even a smaller portion of the voices on campus. It wasn't until we went downstairs to the church records, remember I mentioned the EUB, that we discovered that the school-wide did not integrate until after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The church did advocate for integration as early as the 1950s. The little-used church records proved to be a valuable collection tied directly to the history of Shenandoah. The student finished his capstone and went on to graduate with honors in 2022. So the gal on the left is, she's graduating next month, but that's the precocious freshman that I met. So I experienced all of this up to this point as a part-time reference librarian. In the fall of 2022, I took on the role of full-time reference and archive librarian. Since that time, I've gotten myself invited to things. I asked to go to the Dayton Alumni Days, and those folks, we've been in Winchester for over almost 70 years, I guess. But a long time, right? And so those Dayton alumni are, you know, they're passing away. So it's a big deal to go visit with those folks. So I got myself invited to the homecoming weekend. I thought that was a good idea, right? So at homecoming, and that's Colette and I at homecoming, I brought remnants of the old Buzzy mascot. It was the scary Buzzy. And I brought yearbooks and unidentified photos, just anything to engage with the homecoming community. Planning for the 150th naturally has the institution looking at its past. Again, the University Archive has an opportunity to engage with the community. I and the history professor I mentioned, Jonathan Noyales, co-chair the historical research for our sesquicentennial. Along with this responsibility, the archive is hosting its first ever class using the University Archive. It's called Shenandoah's Past, Practice in Public History. This class offers students hands-on research experience in the archives. As a result of this class, we will experience students' perspectives on important historic milestones in the university's history. We try to stay consistent and accessible with news about the archive. We share digital archival materials with the Office of Marketing and Communications. We also consistently post on our social media pages, and we often feature archive news in our monthly library's newsletter. Future initiatives will be intentional while allowing projects to grow organically based on need and interest. We plan to partner with the Shenandoah Center for Immersive Learning to present more augmented and virtual reality experiences during our 150th anniversary and beyond. We also hope to develop a more solid connection with the Mosaic Center for Diversity so that we may preserve the experiences of underrepresented communities. And we hope to get invited to more events such as the Black Alumni Network Gala, spiritual life events, and events with the Center for Civic Engagement. While our archive is meant to preserve our history, it is also meant to be shared with those who came before us and those who will come after. Thanks a lot. And I got a lot of good ideas earlier in the other sessions, so I really appreciate your time. And if you have any feedback for me, I appreciate it. Feel free to take a screenshot of that if you would like, and I'll get back with you. Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay. Let me make sure. All right. Yep. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience. Okay, there we go. Hello, my name is Ashley Gerald Hill, and I'm a processing archivist at Wake Forest University, which is located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And today, it's going to be very brief, very brief, but I hope that the questions that I bring up today in my presentation can facilitate some discussion, and that we will have time to ask each other questions and hopefully get some ideas and move forward. So I'm going to discuss the future of collections development for student life records in university archives. I will note current record-keeping practices of Gen Z students and analyze their potential impact on the future of archiving student life collections. Ideally, this assessment will lead to collaborations that will enable students to develop consistent methods of records donation and documentation. So just a little bit of background as far as what we already observe and what we have yet to find out. So connecting students in archival collections isn't a new endeavor for university archivists. Discussions in literature date as far back as the 1970s, which I know that sounds kind of weird saying, but that literature identified the importance and the historical value of student life materials and student perspectives. And moving into the 21st century, we find that students were primarily viewed and researched as users of archives and not as donors. And there is limited research on students as donors, but it is out there, and that work is available. The work that is available is insightful as to how archivists can work with input from students on collections development. And though it's useful information, it was created 7 to 20 years ago, which is a wide time range, 13 years, but that just means that the understanding of changing technologies is really important. And so students perform a lot of digital content creation for academics and for their lives outside of class. However, there is a missing component of actual record keeping. Gen Z students don't create as many physical records as previous generations. So when you think of like scrapbooks, dance cards, correspondence, just any physical materials, they don't really have a lot of those. And recently, value shifts have Gen Z and younger generations preferring ambiguity online and anonymity. And so that could possibly lead to a decline in digital records as well. And so my question is, will these minimalized documentation efforts impact collections development in the future? And what can motivate students to not only increase, but improve their record-keeping practices? And will they be open to record keeping for the purpose of donating their materials to the archives? And so to my references, I've acknowledged the foundational ideas that positioned the high value of student life records, but to highlight the work that builds on the archives and students' relationship is the idea that students are integral to the creation of the campus culture. Therefore, the documentation of their experiences should be a priority, especially when you want to balance the perspectives that are represented in the archives, because we have a lot of records from administrative departments and academic departments, but in hindsight, if there's nothing that includes student-created work, that really leaves out a very important voice. I referred to a lot of Helen Swain's work. She is a student life archivist at the University of Illinois, and she did a lot of work in the early 2000s that involved student input for collections development. She even started a student archives advocacy group, or an advising group. I also referred to Jessica Smith and Debbie Wagner. They built on Helen Swain's work, but they acknowledged the use of newer social media apps and technologies that students use. And Sarah Buchanan and Katie Richardson at UCLA actually used the help of archive students to create the Bruins Archive Project, which is an initiative that gives archival advice to student organization leaders. And some common themes I have listed, but in addition to orienting students to archives through introductory classes, other themes and recommendations include the need to emphasize student representation. So it's very important to let them know that what students donate to the archives is basically a reflection of their experience, and it provides, that since it's a primary resource, it's what their snapshot of college life was at that time, and it's not controlled by the voice of administration or anyone else who was there. Also performing surveys and gathering opinions, so learning the perceptions that students have of archives, like how has that perception changed over the past few years, and addressing the ethics of digital records management. And this little graphic is just kind of to break up the text, but these are just examples of current social media apps that students use. So Snapchat, the little ghost, these allow anonymity, but compared to faculty and staff, the tenure of a student is really brief, and that's what makes it historically unique. So to circle back to the idea of younger, like Gen Zers and younger generations valuing being anonymous, these apps like the little purple bee is Fizz. If you work on a college campus, you're probably really familiar with Fizz. It allows students to share their thoughts and opinions and like photographs anonymously. Snapchat allows you to post a picture for a while and then you can delete it. And these actions can also lead to gaps or holes in student life collections. So with that said, how will these brief episodes of Gen Z student life be represented or presented in future decades? Will these trends towards low record keeping lead to a continuous decline in records from Gen Z? And what will motivate them in subsequent generations to use more permanent and accessible record keeping? And research implies that the surveys of student perceptions and opinions are requisite to find possible motivators for record creation and donation. In addition to surveys, archivists should revisit ways to increase the department's presence on campus, especially outside of the library. Archivists also need to continue to identify and prioritize underrepresented groups. And in conclusion, the role of archives in maintaining campus culture relies on having as much documentation of student life as possible, but how can that be achieved if materials are inaccessible or non-existent? Again, like a lot of students who do use Instagram, those are, even if they aren't private, they're still personal, and so that's not really, it's not ethical, or just as, we don't have interest in like looking at individual student accounts to find documentation like that. So archivists must help students understand the importance of record keeping in order to have an accurate representation of campus life during their time as college students. Can you see the QR code? Yes. This is just a feedback form that asks, I know we have, the point is to start a discussion, but just in case any topics weren't addressed, or if there are additional questions, or if you're interested in doing research or collaborating, please fill it out, and I would be more than happy to share with anyone the answers. If that's okay, if you respond to the survey and are looking for collaborative opportunities, I could aggregate that information and share it out. Step right.
All right, there's questions, discussion. Yes, yes. Oh, there's two hands at the same time. I'll go back.
Hi, I had a question for Ashley. I'm curious about you brought up a lot of really good points about collecting records from Gen Z versus previous generations. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like the practical applications of doing that. Like, is it very intentional recruiting from students to get their records from them? Are you reaching out to specific populations? Is this very in the early stages and haven't actually done anything? So I'm just curious as to, a lot of students probably don't know that we want their stuff. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on like the outreach and the recruitment kind of component of collecting.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I guess, and that's part of the idea that students were traditional, or I guess after archives wanted to kind of open themselves up to more users, a lot of the earlier research, I guess in the 90s and early 2000s, were like viewing students as just users. And so, because the archives are already full, I mean, a lot of us have backlogs of everything, like digital and physical materials, but that doesn't negate the fact that we have, generations of students who are in school right now who are gonna graduate, and then they're gonna come back in 20 or 30 years to homecoming, and, they don't have as many materials as, what we've had from, like, classes long before many of us were even born. Oh, sorry. My bad. But yes, so this is, it's just an initial endeavor for me. Just something that popped into my mind because, working with materials, you always see just interesting little knickknacks and trinkets and stuff, and you know that someone from this era wouldn't have anything like that. Myself included, like I went to 8th grade dances and I don't have a dance card. So it's just interesting seeing what gets documented and what was important to people in time, especially in this case, college students. And so right now, I have kind of started a project doing oral histories focused on fraternity and sorority members of Black Greek organizations. I think that it was interesting to me being on a predominantly white campus, just seeing how Greek life is experienced differently for different students. So that's one aspect of what I've been doing, and hopefully like I can continue that and make it larger, a larger project that includes more voices. Did that answer your question, or did you? Okay.
Hi. Hello, great presentation. I guess this is more of a comment, and then I'll go into a question, but we encountered something similar with current students as not just users, but also donors to the archives. And we've kind of flipped that switch to, or helped kind of figure out how we could do that passively without them, I guess, thinking about, oh, what do they want from me? Because part of it turned into, well, what I have is probably important. So then it turned to us saying, well, of course, it always is important, even if you don't think so right this moment. But in a art project that my colleague Jonah Marie had created, where they would use photographs from our collections and create a work of art from that. And they had the option to donate that work. So it's an opportunity to have their work archived for future reference, and it's also their perceptions of the college history. So it's kind of a few different things, a few different themes that you've shared. And then my question is, as you're figuring out, maybe how to get these records in, one situation that we encountered that we still haven't quite figured out yet was we have a large gap of LGBTQ records in our archive, like in our student publications, which cover roughly 30 to 40 years of the college history, at least consistently, really have no mention of LGBTQ history on campus. There are a couple of, maybe a handful of examples that reference that community, not even on campus, but just overall. And so when like Pride Month would come around and other sort of events that were happening on campus, we had nothing to provide. And so what we did was work with the Pride Alliance organization on campus. It's a student club. And what they did was they donated what they wanted to give to us. It was, obviously, we said, anything that you want to contribute, whether that be photos, oral histories, this is all of what we collect. They ended up donating buttons and things that they've made. But also it was an issue, not an issue, but a lot of members didn't want their names included. So it's things like balancing that slippery slope, that, treading those waters, I guess. And I don't know if you've encountered that, if you have any sort of, thoughts behind that. Yeah, I'll pause there. Maybe you do, maybe you don't.
Okay. Was that like for both of us or for me? Okay.
Well, that was my comment, and I've learned so much from you two in particular. But that's the Mosaic for Diversity, the Mosaic Center for Diversity. I was thinking of that population, but also we don't have a lot of other communities, the Hispanic community, other religious communities, but because it was founded as a Christian school and it's still loosely affiliated with the United Methodist Church. So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of misrepresentation or underrepresentation that I'm looking for ideas, and that's where the partnerships are, and getting myself invited to things, and I do have, so the gals. The history of the women at the university is usually about being a princess, about being dressed up. And when SGA had its heyday in the 70s and 80s, it was well represented by, and sorry, white male guys, but that's the only voices that was heard on the Student Government Association. So even though we've always been co-ed, even women haven't had the same histories recorded. So, yeah, I'm open to all kinds of ideas.
Yeah, I think we have started some projects, and I feel like oral history is about to have to do like some heavy lifting for moving forward. But I know at Wake Forest, so it's a PWI. Was founded in Wake Forest, North Carolina, and it was supposed to be, it was a religious school as well. Students would come in, young boys, and leave as preachers or go back to, managing their family's land. And so now, that there's been integration. Women started attending in the 1940s because of the war. And we do have LGBTQ students, and so we're doing oral histories for a lot of different groups. And the Afro-American Society, which was actually started in the late 60s, we have some records for like those students demanding a more diverse faculty and staff, but in that entire collection, I think there might be like 24 items. And so this is dating back to the 60s. Right. So there has to be more out there. It's just a matter of like, how do we find it and who do we contact? But yeah, I think oral histories are about to become a really big thing.
While others think of the question, here we go. While others think of a question, I will ask one. Ashley, you alluded to, and this question for both of you, but you alluded to the social media platforms. The ones that are prevalent for Gen Z are designed to not be kept, like you said. And it's actually, strangely enough, a crossover with some of my questions as a records manager for public records, because if government agencies are using social media in that way, you can't capture it in our public records law. But it's the same problem for y'all, because if students are communicating primarily through Snap or through Instagram stories and they go away so quickly, it's a technological problem. So I'm wondering if y'all have thought about ways to encourage students to, if you're communicating here, here's a way to get it out in a way that we can keep it, or maybe oral history is the solution for figuring out how do you capture this kind of communication, because we know this platform is just not an avenue to do so.
That kind of touches on the question that I asked about finding out what motivates them. Yes, they are using these apps that are intended for, like short-term access. But the thing is getting them to care about that, or finding out if they care about that. In the moment, they might not, but of course, over the past couple of years, we've done a few pop-up exhibits for some of the organizations on campus who do have materials in our records. And so my thinking is like moving forward into the future that some of these students who are in organizations, when they come back to campus, like they will not have materials that they generated while they were here, other than posting pictures or having digital images that they take with the intention of only just like briefly sharing them.
Hi, it's not really a question, but maybe like an idea. Something I've been wanting to do, I just don't know the logistics or how to make it happen, but like a scrapbooking hour or something, just to like catch students on their way to class or something like that, and like having them fill out their favorite memory at the school or something like that. And then the other comment I was going to say, I can't remember the institution, but they created a LibGuide that had guidelines as to like what you can do as your student organization to preserve your materials. And so hopefully I can find the link. It's somewhere in my bookmarks, but I would love to share that because it was a really great resource and something I would love to implement at our institution, just like to give students a few guidelines on if you do want your documents and your records to be preserved, here's what you can do to do that.
Thank you. And we have, at the end of every semester, we have this thing called Wake the Library for the students. And oftentimes there'll be some little activity that they can use to decompress, and actually thought about scrapbooking that would be helpful.
Hi. So a lot of student activism currently takes place through encrypted messaging apps like Signal. And this, I think, represents a real challenge for understanding how student activism is organized in the modern day. And in addition to just the legal problems therein. I'm just kind of throwing this out as a wrinkle. I don't know, I don't really have a solution for it. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas or anything.
That's in its infancy for us as well, but I will recommend Project Stand. Have you heard of Project Stand? Okay, Project Stand, STAND. It is a large project that gives guidelines for institutions on how to document student activism, and it's run by Lael Watkins, and I think she's in the DMV. But yes, Project Stand. I'll make a note of that so I can share it. But yes, that's a great resource if you're looking for help on documenting student activism. And one of my resources, my apologies, I forgot to mention their name, but their work covered, it was influenced by the 2016 riots that started. That school is in the Pacific Northwest, but I will make a note of that one as well and share it with you.
Let's ask one more question, while others think. Both of your universities are in very interesting settings. Shenandoah is very distinct. The Shenandoah Valley, Wake Forest, was moved to Winston-Salem, but it's like pretty much synonymous with that area. I'm wondering if there's been discussions of like trying to document town gown, because there's been a lot of the community relationships with students and vice versa, and trying to document like the local organizations around campus that maybe aren't affiliated with campus but tend to do a lot of work with the student body, and maybe that's a way to get student voices as well if they're working with a local nonprofit.
I hadn't thought of that. That's a great idea. Because, well, the Center for Civic Engagement, I mentioned that in my talk, but they go out to places like Watts. It's a thermal shelter for in the winter, and other things they do for people that are unhoused. So yeah, I hadn't thought, because I kind of always avoid that because I have such a backlog of stuff. I'm like, no, I can't take any more, not from the community. Go to the public library. Are you crazy? But no, they could offer me some student and the rest of the university community. They could offer us some history. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a good idea. Thank you.
I think Wake has had a really interesting relationship with Winston. Wake is usually often referred to as like a Wake bubble. Even though it did move to Winston-Salem, again, it's predominantly white. And now most of the student body isn't even from North Carolina. A lot of them are from out west in the Northeast. So there is just kind of like that disconnect with things off campus. And there are organizations on campus that do community service work, but that is a really good place to start, try to see those connections.
I have a question. I didn't realize your school moved too and survived, like Wake Forest. We all know Wake Forest, right? Where did you move from?
Wake Forest.
Or
Personally, or Wake Forest? The school.
the school
It moved from Wake Forest, North Carolina.
to Winston-Salem. Okay. I was asking my husband that. I said, how come that's not Wake Forest, that's in Winston-Salem. Right there's Wake Forest, what's going on here? I'd never been to Raleigh at all, so I've never been in this section of North Carolina. I've never been west of 95. So thank you so much again for having me. I'm learning so much.
Wake folks, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the original campus some other school now in Wake Forest, or some of those original buildings?
Yes, Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary moved into that
Yes.
campus. They actually shared the buildings in 1955, and then Wake moved to Winston-Salem in 1956, and they still are housed in all those buildings. But you can see WF crest and ironwork all over the campus, but it is now Southeastern.
And they're currently speaking at the other session.
And they're currently speaking at the other session. Also,
No, my husband.
I was going to say something.
Sorry, I'm up here having my own conversation. But
Oh.
my husband's from North Carolina. I mean, he's UNC. He went to NC State his first year of college. And he didn't tell me this. I mean, these people, they need us. They don't know these things.
They have T-shirts in the town of Wake Forest that says Wake Forest, where the college used to be.
I also would like to add, at our library, we have a ZSR ambassadors, so it's a group of students that are advocates for the library, and so if you're an institution and you don't have a program like that and you're interested in something like that, we'd be happy to share any information. And they also recently reached out to us because they want an audience with library staff to kind of up their profile and find out what it is that they can do. So that's also an opportunity that I'm looking into, and I'd be happy to share any information if anyone wants follow up on that. And that's it for me.
I have a question. Oh, no, let me have. Did somebody have a question? Oh,
I'm just kind of simmering on the idea and that you brought up, Ashley, about the kind of culture or the value of anonymity and privacy in student life documentation and social media for Gen Z. And I know in some kind of initiatives that we've done at NC State to kind of document student voices, there's a lot of sensitivity that we have approached students with in terms of like how people can access your materials. A lot of concern, of course, naturally for privacy and if, this could be used, if materials that are available online could be found in a Google search by a future employer or something like that. There's legitimate kind of privacy concerns. So a lot of times when I've spoken to students, and it's been a while since we did this, but the idea or the option of having materials kind of restricted for an initial period seems to really relax them, but it's also, I know, logistically not great administratively to kind of take in things that you can't provide access to. So I'm just curious if anybody else has kind of encountered that or thought about it and tried to incorporate some kind of sustainable way to imagine that.
I'll open that up to the audience, if anyone.
Does anyone else have experience with collecting records from students and placing restrictions on them for delayed access?
Hi, Adriana Bennett. I work at UNC Charlotte. One of the student collections we have is from a student organizing group. So with recommendations from Project Stand, like Ashley mentioned, we were able to ingest their digital records, but we made it so it was only accessible in the reading room only. And we also had people back in, I think, 2016 with the Keith Lamont Scott shooting, we had people who wanted to share their photos with us, and we also made those reading room accessible only, just so we were complying, we would be able to comply with any kinds of records requests because we're a public institution, but also we weren't putting people's faces on the internet for possible prosecution.
Anyone else want to speak to this point about delayed access?
Hi. I think another idea to consider in thinking about delayed access and making sure, that people's faces on the internet doesn't present a future problem would be an idea of like a continuum of consent. So being able to offer the option for students to rescind their consent to have their materials accessible. I guess that would involve like maintaining consistent contact with student groups over time. I know that might get kind of tricky if certain individuals, if individual students have, are more opinionated about that than others, like it would require being in contact with them for a longer stretch of time, of course, beyond the time that they graduate. But yeah, I think just kind of like renegotiating this idea of consent could be a relevant, point of study on this topic. Thanks.
I just thought of another wrinkle, not like capturing Fizz. If you guys aren't on Fizz, Ashley keeps me informed of what's going on Wake Forest campus on Fizz. But I'm on a working group for our archive at Internet Archive, and a lot of student groups are creating websites, Wix websites, social media websites that aren't anonymous. Or Wake Forest uses this thing called The Link for all the student organizations. I don't know if any other campuses do, but they're next to impossible to crawl with Internet Archive crawlers and archive it. And these aren't anonymous. These are our organization's bylaws and meeting minutes or even constitution or something, some information about current organizational groups. And they're not even meant to be anonymous or disappear, but they're really, really hard to crawl. This isn't a question, this is just another thing I thought of that's really hard about student organizations or student life, that they're not even trying to hide from us. They're doing what they're supposed to do, or in general, but are very hard. Anyone have experience with that? Oh, Austin knows the answer.
Well, I would just say, I mean, we've been using Archive It for about 5 years now, where I am currently. That's one of the things we crawl. And I mean, 2 jobs ago, in Virginia, I also tried to do that with Archive It for about 4 years. And I would say that, I mean, definitely, and actually this was one of the notes I wrote down, so thank you, was to follow up with Archive It about, because, you know, I used to be able to crawl Facebook pages pretty well when I was in that job in Virginia, Washington Lee University, so I know where you are.
That's a big school.
But in any event, but now, like, that really doesn't work well at all, and, like, Instagram does not work well at all. So social media platforms, I've been having a lot of trouble with that in the past year, and I've been kind of trying to, like, think about what to do with that instead. But I think the sort of standalone websites, like the Wix ones actually are a little bit more challenging than some of the others. But I think those I have had pretty good luck with. And so we have a list and we try to, like, I have it set up to try to do those annually. So I think it's still worth trying to do that, even though, like, it isn't all going to capture super well. I definitely still think what you do capture is, you know, useful. But if other people have thoughts on social media in particular, and sort of different ways of saving that, I think, you know, I'd be interested in that too, because that is, I think, the hardest thing. And well, and mapping, which is out of that's not like a student thing, but if you're capturing digital humanities projects with it, like I don't think they're ever going to figure out how to capture dynamic maps. I'll just say that, because that's, you know, but anyways.
Maybe meet back in a year and talk about solutions to that question, solutions to web archiving for what's not meant to disappear.
Yeah, and that was also another, something that I had read in regard to the ethics of managing digital records, because a lot of the stuff that, you know, crawling, like, do students even know that we do that? And even if it is, you know, like, referencing the link, which is where the student organizations post all of their bylaws and update their events and stuff like that, you know, just the idea of
The man.
yeah, I was gonna say like a big admin, but you know,
Big archive.
That we have these tools to just be able to take these internet snapshots of stuff, even though, you know, it's nothing nefarious, but
I guess
the
this is
idea of it
where
might
I should
be.
step in and say that we also take captures of anything sent to the governor or any other public official, and you might not know it, but you're going to be in the state archives permanently if you do send a letter. So even like a private Facebook message. So ethics aside, that's what the retention schedule says. So I'm not saying it's ethically right. It's just that's the way it has to be for government records.
Right.
Well, you get no hate mail from me. So.
And that is the time for our session. Please join me in thanking our panelists one more time. So it's now time for the poster session and vendor exhibition. So the next hour, you can please mingle out here in the lobby. And whether you stay for this or leave early, we will. If you're going to the reception, we will see you at 5:30 down in All Saints Chapel. And if not, we'll see you in the morning. Thank you so much.